The crying pierced through the airplane cabin like a siren, raw and unrelenting. Not the typical fussy toddler cry that passengers grudgingly tolerate on flights, but something different, something that made heads turn with a mixture of concern and irritation. Row 19, Economy Class. Dr. Malik Johnson's eyes snapped open from his half-sleep state, his brown fingers instinctively gripping the armrest. Years of working as a pediatric occupational therapist had trained his ears to recognize certain sounds, certain patterns. This wasn't a tantrum. This was distress, real, desperate distress. Before his tired brain could fully process what was happening, he felt movement beside him. "Wait, Leah!" But his 7-year-old daughter was already unbuckling her seatbelt with the determined efficiency of a child on a mission. Her small frame, skin the warm brown of her late mother's, slipped past him before he could grab her arm. Her 2 afro puffs bounced as she moved with purpose. "Leah," he called out louder this time, using her name the way he did when she was about to do something that would get them both in trouble. She didn't stop, didn't even turn around. She was already moving up the aisle, her purple sneakers padding softly against the carpeted floor, weaving between flight attendants and passengers with practiced ease. Malik's heart hammered against his ribcage as he scrambled out of his seat, his tall frame muttering apologies to the passengers he had to climb over. A flight attendant stepped into the aisle, her professional smile firmly in place, but Leah had already slipped past her like water through fingers. By the time Malik reached first class where he definitely did not belong in his worn khakis and wrinkled button-down, Leah was already kneeling in the aisle beside a young boy. The crying had stopped. Not gradually, not with the slow winding down of a child being comforted. It had simply stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost louder than the screaming had been. Malik froze in the entrance to first class, his prepared apology dying on his lips. His daughter's hands were moving, flowing through the air with graceful precision, forming shapes and signs that the little boy was watching with wide, tear-stained eyes. The child's own hands began to move, hesitant at first, then faster, more urgent. A woman sat in the seat beside the boy, and Malik's first thought was that she looked like she belonged in a magazine. A beautiful black woman with sharp cheekbones, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Malik's monthly rent. But her face told a different story. Her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion carved into the lines around her deep brown eyes, or the way her hands trembled slightly as they gripped the armrests. She was staring at Leah with an expression Malik had seen before in his work, the look of a parent who'd been drowning and suddenly felt air in their lungs. "I'm so sorry," Malik started, moving forward to collect his daughter. "She shouldn't have—" The woman held up one hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Her eyes never left Leah's moving hands. Is she signing to him?" The woman's voice was carefully controlled, but Malik could hear the crack underneath. "Is she understanding what he's saying?" Malik nodded as Leah's hands moved through another series of signs. The boy responded, his movements becoming calmer, more deliberate. Then Leah turned to look at her father. "Daddy, he needs his blue blanket. His grandmother made it for him. It's in the silver case up there. He says it smells like her and he can't fly without it. He's scared because he can't find it." The woman's composure shattered like glass. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment, Malik thought she might break down completely. Instead, she stood up so fast, she nearly hit her head on the overhead bin, her hands shaking as she reached for the latch. His grandmother's blanket. Of course. That's what he needs. She looked at Malik, her eyes glistening. Why didn't I couldn't understand him. I couldn't understand my own son. Malik stepped forward, his height giving him the advantage in reaching the silver carry-on case. He pulled it down carefully, and the woman's hands were already unzipping it before he could set it on the seat. She pulled out a hand-knitted blanket in blue, woven together in an intricate pattern that spoke of hours of love and patience. The boy's face transformed the moment he saw it. His hands reached out, grabbing the blanket and pulling it to his chest, burying his face in its soft folds. The change was immediate and profound. His entire body relaxed, his breathing evening out as he clutched the blanket like a lifeline. Leah's hands moved again, gentle and patient, and the boy responded. His signs slower now, calmer. Malik watched his daughter ask about the blanket, about the patterns knitted into it, about the grandmother who had made it. The boy's face shifted from distress to something that looked like wonder. The wonder of finding someone who understood his language perfectly, who saw him not as the crying child disrupting the flight, but as a person with something important to say. The woman sank back into her seat, her eyes fixed on her son. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Then louder, "Thank you. I should have understood him. I've been learning sign language for 2 years. But when he gets upset like this, when everything becomes too much, She closed her eyes. "I fail him." Malik felt something shift in his chest. He'd heard this before. This particular flavor of guilt. He'd felt it himself on countless sleepless nights. "It's not failure," he said gently, crouching down so he was at eye level with her. "It's hard. Leah's been signing for 4 years now. She had to learn for different reasons. But even she has days where communication breaks down. You're not failing him. You're here. You're trying. That's what matters." The woman opened her eyes, and Malik saw something in them that made him look away. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded in a way that felt too intimate for a stranger on an airplane. A flight attendant appeared beside them, her professional mask back in place, but her eyes kind. "Perhaps the children would be more comfortable if the young lady stayed up here for a bit. We have an empty seat across the aisle, sir. If you'd like to sit there, just while they connect." It was phrased as a suggestion, but Malik understood it was also the flight attendant's way of managing the situation. He glanced at Leah, who was already showing the boy a new sign. Her face lit up with the particular joy she got when teaching someone something new. "If that's okay with you," Malik said to the woman. "Please," she said immediately. "Please, if she doesn't mind. Eli hasn't been this calm since—" She swallowed hard. "Since his grandmother died 6 weeks ago." The weight of that sentence hung in the air between them. Malik settled into the seat across the aisle, and for the next 3 hours, he watched his daughter work magic he'd seen before, but never quite like this. Leah and Eli, he learned the boy's name from overhearing the woman use it, played games with their hands, their fingers forming stories and jokes and questions. Leah taught him new signs, and he taught her some back. Their silent conversation more animated than most spoken ones. The woman sat beside her son, watching everything with an intensity that spoke of memorization. Malik noticed her hands moving slightly, mimicking signs, trying to learn from Leah's patient teaching. Somewhere over Nevada, Malik caught her eye. She gave him a small smile, sad but genuine. "I'm Ava Sinclair. Malik Johnson, and that's Leah. She's remarkable." "She is." Malik felt the familiar swell of pride mixed with something more complicated. "She's teaching me new things every day." Ava nodded, her eyes drifting back to the children. "Eli is my whole world, but sometimes I wonder if I'm equipped to be the parent he needs." "I think every parent wonders that," Malik said softly. "Hearing kids, deaf kids, somewhere in between. We all wonder if we're enough." "Are you traveling for Thanksgiving?" Ava asked, and Malik recognized it for what it was, a lifeline thrown to safer conversational waters. "Visiting my sister in Seattle. She's been begging to see Leah. It's been a year since our last visit." "We're going home. I had business meetings in Atlanta. I usually don't bring Eli on business trips, but after my mother—" She stopped, redirected. I couldn't leave him, not right now. The grief in her voice was fresh, still bleeding. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Leah showed Eli how to pop his ears safely, something the boy had clearly struggled with before based on his nervous anticipation. When the wheels touched down, Eli looked at Leah with an expression of pure gratitude, his hands moving in what Malik recognized as "thank you," repeated 3 times. The flight attendants were busy preparing for arrival, and Malik knew they needed to return to their seats. Leah gave Eli one final sign, something that made him smile, before reluctantly standing up. As they gathered their things, Ava reached out, her hand briefly touching Malik's arm. Could I get your contact information?" The question came out rushed, as if she'd been building courage to ask it. "I'd like to thank you and your daughter properly. Maybe lunch if you're free during your stay in Seattle. Eli would love to see Leah again, and She paused. "I'd like to talk more about communication strategies, about a lot of things." Malik hesitated. Something about this felt significant in a way he couldn't quite name. But Leah was already signing excitedly about seeing her new friend again, her hands moving so fast Malik had to ask her to slow down. He pulled out one of his business cards from Peachtree Children's Rehabilitation Center, writing his cell number on the back. "Sure," he said, handing it to Ava. Her fingers closed around the card like it was something precious. 3 days later, Malik's phone rang while he and Leah were walking through Volunteer Park with his sister. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Dr. Johnson, this is Ava Sinclair from the flight." He remembered her voice immediately, that careful control overlaying something more vulnerable. "I was wondering if you and Leah would be available for lunch tomorrow. Eli hasn't stopped talking about Leah, well, signing about her. It would mean a lot to him, to us." Malik glanced at Leah, who was feeding ducks at the pond with his sister. She looked so happy, so unburdened. Since her mother had died 4 years ago, a sudden brain aneurysm during a morning jog that had torn their world apart, Malik had made it his mission to preserve every moment of her happiness. The memory hit him without warning, the way it sometimes still did. Coming home from his morning shift at the hospital to find the police cars in the driveway. The neighbor who'd found Tanya collapsed on the sidewalk 3 blocks from home. The way Leah had stopped speaking entirely, her voice swallowed by grief too big for a 3-year-old to process. 6 months of silence. 6 months where the only way Malik could reach his daughter was through signs, through the language they'd built together in the quiet spaces where words had failed them. Even after her voice returned, tentative and small, they'd kept their sign language as their special bond, their private way of speaking when the world got too loud. "Tomorrow works," Malik said, pulling himself back to the present. "What time and where?" The restaurant Ava suggested was elegant but family-friendly in downtown Seattle, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a kids' menu printed on thick cardstock. Malik felt underdressed in his khakis and button-down, but Leah had insisted on wearing her favorite dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and her confidence bolstered his own. Ava looked different off the plane. Still polished, that seemed to be her natural state, but softer somehow. She wore dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that made her look less like a CEO and more like someone's mom. Her natural hair was styled in beautiful goddess locks that framed her face perfectly. Eli's face lit up the moment he saw Leah, his hands flying in excited greeting. The children fell into easy conversation immediately, their hands dancing through signs while Malik and Ava settled into chairs across from each other. "I realized I was quite a mess on the plane," she said with a self-deprecating smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not usually so, unraveled." "You were a mother whose child was in distress. That's not being unraveled, that's being human." Something in her expression shifted, softened. "Eli's grandmother, my mother, Evelyn, passed away 6 weeks ago. Kidney failure. It was sudden. She was the one who truly understood him, who could calm him when I couldn't. She taught me to sign, pushed me to learn, but she was always better at it than me. More patient, more intuitive. Ava's voice caught. I'm still learning how to do this alone. Over pasta for the kids and salad for the adults, the story emerged gradually, piece by piece. Ava was the CEO of a sustainable energy company she'd built from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Her ex-husband had left when Eli was 2 years old, unable to handle having a deaf child. He said it was too hard, Ava said, her voice carefully neutral in the way that suggested old wounds. Said he didn't sign up for this kind of life, as if Eli was a burden instead of a blessing. She watched her son signing animatedly with Leah about dolphins. So it's been just us, me and Eli and my mother, until… She didn't need to finish the sentence. Malik found himself sharing his own story, the words coming easier than he'd expected. Tanya's death, Leah's months of silence, how sign language had become their bridge back to each other, how it had saved them both when everything else was falling apart. I work at Peachtree Children's Rehabilitation Center, pediatric occupational therapy. I help kids find ways to communicate, to connect with the world around them. After Tanya died, and Leah stopped speaking, I used everything I'd ever learned professionally to reach my daughter personally. Sign language wasn't just about communication for us, it was about survival. Ava set down her fork, her full attention on Malik. I can buy Eli anything, she said quietly, her eyes on the children. The best therapists, the latest technology, education at schools most people can't even imagine. But I can't buy him what Leah just gave him, a friend who sees him as completely normal, who doesn't see his deafness first, and him second, who just sees Eli. You sound like a mother who loves her son, Malik replied. Money doesn't make that any easier or harder. We're all just doing our best with what we have. But you've given us something priceless, Ava insisted, and there was an edge of frustration in her voice now. And I don't know how to repay that. I don't know how to… She stopped, seeming to hear herself, and laughed shakily. I'm sorry, I must sound so out of touch, so privileged CEO who thinks everything can be solved with money. You sound like someone who cares, Malik said gently. That's not out of touch. That's exactly the right touch. Their lunch extended to 3 hours. The children were devastated when it finally had to end, so Ava suggested meeting again in 2 days at Volunteer Park. Malik agreed, watching Leah's face light up with excitement. The park meeting turned into an afternoon at the Seattle Aquarium, where Eli and Leah pressed their faces against the glass tanks, signing to each other about the octopuses and sea otters. Malik and Ava walked behind them, conversation flowing easily between comfortable silences. My mother would have loved this, Ava said softly as they watched the children. She always said Eli needed friends who understood him, not just tolerated him, but truly got who he was. Tanya would have loved seeing Leah like this too, Malik replied, using her voice, signed and spoken, to help someone. My wife always said our daughter had a healer's heart. It was the first time either of them had spoken about their lost loved ones without the conversation feeling heavy with unspoken grief. What started as a promise became a pattern. Monthly weekend visits that quickly evolved into twice-monthly trips, then every weekend. Ava would arrange flights for Malik and Leah to come to Seattle, or she and Eli would fly to Atlanta. The expense was nothing to her, she insisted, compared to seeing Eli thrive. Malik watched his daughter bloom in her role as Eli's best friend and interpreter. She'd always been empathetic, even before her own trauma had taught her about pain. But this was different. This was purpose. Leah taught Eli signs he didn't know, helped him navigate interactions with hearing kids, showed him that being deaf didn't mean being limited. And Eli, in turn, showed Leah the beauty of deaf culture, the rich community she'd only touched the edges of before. But something else was growing too. something Malik tried not to examine too closely because it felt both inevitable and impossible. He found himself looking forward to the adult conversation as much as Leah looked forward to seeing Eli. Ava was brilliant in ways that intimidated him at first. She could discuss renewable energy policy and stock market trends with the same ease that she discussed Eli's latest developmental milestones. But she also made him laugh with stories from her corporate world that seemed like science fiction compared to his hospital environment. She told him about board meetings where million-dollar decisions were made over catered lunches, about investors who couldn't understand why she insisted on sustainability over maximum profit, about being one of the few black women CEOs in her industry and the particular challenges that brought. She asked his advice about Eli constantly, valued his professional expertise, but never made him feel like a consultant. She wanted to know his opinion on everything from discipline strategies to whether Eli should attend a mainstream school or a deaf school. She listened when he talked about his work, asked intelligent questions about occupational therapy techniques, remembered details from conversations they'd had weeks before. She wanted to know about his patience, about the little victories that made his job worthwhile, about the heartbreaks when a child couldn't make the progress everyone hoped for. And in the quiet moments, when the kids were playing and the adults were simply existing in the same space, Malik would catch Ava watching him with an expression he was afraid to interpret. 6 months after that first flight, his phone rang late one evening. Leah was already asleep, and Malik was reviewing patient files at his kitchen table when he saw Ava's name on the screen. "I'm restructuring my company," she said without preamble, her voice tight with something that sounded like nervousness. "Moving our secondary headquarters to Atlanta. It would mean Eli and I would be there at least 2 weeks every month, maybe more." Malik's heart forgot how to beat properly. That's a big change, a huge change." "Eli needs Leah," Ava said quickly. "They're teaching each other so much. Leah's helping him connect with the hearing world in ways my money and therapy never could. And he's showing her the beauty of deaf culture, the pride in it. They're good together." "They are," Malik agreed, his mouth dry. "But it's not just that." Ava's voice dropped lower. "Malik, I think I'm falling for you. I know that's probably inappropriate given everything you and Leah have done for us. I know the power dynamics are complicated and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I can't keep pretending that I'm just interested in our children's friendship. I look forward to seeing you. I think about you when you're not around, and I hope, that maybe you feel something similar. But if I'm wrong, please just tell me and we can—" "Ava," Malik interrupted gently, his heart now beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. "I feel the same way." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "Really?" Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way he'd never heard from her. "Really. I've been trying to figure out how to say the same thing for the last 2 months. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that someone like you wouldn't be interested in someone like me, that the universe doesn't work that way." "Someone like me?" Ava laughed, but it was shaky. "Malik, you're the first person in years who's made me feel like I'm more than a CEO or a single mother or a walking bank account. You see me. Actually see me. Do you know how rare that is?" They talked until 2 in the morning, the conversation flowing from feelings to fears, to the future they might build together. It felt terrifying and right in equal measure. By the following autumn, 1 year after that chaotic flight where their worlds had collided at 30,000 feet, they were a family. Not officially, not yet, but in all the ways that mattered. Ava had bought a house in Atlanta's northern suburbs, a beautiful colonial with enough bedrooms for everyone and a backyard where the kids could play. She kept her Seattle place for business trips, but Atlanta was home now, their home. The 4 of them had created something beautiful in that house, a space where both spoken and signed languages flowed freely, where Leah's voice and Eli's silence were equally valued. where differences were celebrated instead of merely tolerated. Malik had worried about the financial differences between them. His salary as a pediatric occupational therapist was comfortable, but nowhere near Ava's wealth. He'd worried about feeling inadequate, about being seen as someone who'd latched onto her money, about losing himself in the shadow of her success. Ava had addressed it head-on one evening as they sat on the back porch watching the kids chase fireflies. "You gave me my son back," she had said simply, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You and Leah showed me how to be a complete family. You taught me that understanding matters more than control, that patience matters more than perfection. There's no price tag for that. There's no amount of money I could offer that would equal what you've given us. But—" "No buts," she had interrupted firmly. "I have money. You have emotional intelligence and parenting wisdom that I desperately need. We both bring something essential to this. It's not about equal finances, it's about equal partnership. Can you accept that?" He'd kissed her instead of answering with words, and that had been answer enough. Their love story unfolded slowly, built on the foundation of respect and shared values, and the recognition that they each completed something in the other. Ava brought security and resources, yes, but also ambition and a different perspective on the world that challenged Malik to think bigger. Malik brought grounding presence, emotional availability, and a therapeutic wisdom that helped Ava finally forgive herself for not being the perfect mother to Eli. One evening, as they watched Leah and Eli signing an elaborate story they'd created together, something about dolphins who could fly and astronauts who spoke underwater, Ava leaned against Malik's shoulder with a contented sigh. "My mother would have loved you," she said softly. "She always told me I needed someone who could see past the CEO to the mother underneath. Someone who understood that my greatest achievement wasn't my company, but raising Eli to be proud of who he is." "Tanya would have loved seeing Leah like this," Malik replied, his voice thick with emotion. Using her voice, signed and spoken, to change someone's world. "My wife always said our daughter had a healer's heart." I think she was right. It was the first time they'd spoken about their lost loves without pain overshadowing the memory. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had softened into something they could hold without bleeding. 2 years after that first flight, 2 years after a little girl had refused to stay in her seat when another child was crying, Malik and Ava married in a small ceremony at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. Leah and Eli served as ring bearers, both of them dressed in matching outfits they had picked out together. Before their parents exchanged vows, the children stood before the gathered friends and family, a beautiful gathering of black faces, from grandparents to cousins to colleagues, and signed their own promises to each other, promises of siblinghood, of friendship, of always being there to interpret when the world got too confusing. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Ava had established a foundation for deaf children shortly after they'd gotten engaged, with Malik as the director. It combined her business expertise and resources with his therapeutic knowledge and compassion. They were already helping hundreds of families navigate the challenges and joys of raising deaf children, providing resources that many couldn't otherwise afford, training interpreters, and advocating for better inclusion policies in schools. The foundation was named after both their mothers. The Tanya Evelyn Memorial Foundation for Deaf Children, honoring the women who had shaped them into the parents they'd become. On their wedding night, after the guests had gone home and the kids were asleep at his sister's house, Malik and Ava sat on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the Atlanta skyline. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if Leah had stayed in her seat that day?" Ava asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Every single day," Malik admitted. "But I think about it less as chance and more as, recognition. Leah recognized something in Eli's cry that I was too tired to fully process. She recognized a child who needed the one thing she could give him. A voice, Ava said softly. More than that. Connection. Understanding. The knowledge that he wasn't alone. None of us are alone anymore, Ava said, turning to face him. That's what you and Leah gave us. That's what you keep giving us every single day. Malik kissed his wife, and marveled at how a 5-hour flight had somehow delivered him to this moment, to this woman, to this family they'd built from fragments of grief and loss and unexpected grace. 5 years after that November flight, the foundation had helped over 2,000 families. Leah was 12 now, fluent in 3 forms of sign language, and already talking about becoming a deaf education teacher. Eli was 11, confident and happy, attending a mainstream school where he thrived with the support systems Ava and Malik had fought to put in place. The family had grown too. Ava and Malik had a son together, little Noah Johnson Sinclair, who was learning sign language before he could speak, growing up in a household where communication came in many forms, and all were equally valued. On quiet evenings, when the chaos of 3 children finally settled into sleep, Malik and Ava would sometimes pull up the video from that flight, a recording a passenger had taken and sent to Ava weeks after they'd met, a gift she'd had professionally transferred and saved. They'd watch Leah unbuckle her seatbelt and march up that aisle with purpose. They'd watch the moment her hands started moving, the moment Eli's crying stopped, the moment 2 children found each other across the divide of sound and silence. And they'd remember that love is sometimes loud and sometimes quiet, sometimes spoken and sometimes signed, but always, always worth the courage it takes to reach across the aisle and say, in whatever language you know, I see you. I hear you. You're not alone. Their story became a testament to the truth that love doesn't always arrive when or how you expect it. Sometimes it comes in the form of a 7-year-old girl who won't sit still when another child is crying, who trusts her instincts over conventional rules, who believes that connection is more important than staying put. Sometimes it comes in the courage to reach across the airplane aisle, between economy and first class, between 2 worlds that aren't supposed to touch, between a single father working tirelessly to make ends meet, and a CEO who could buy anything except what mattered most. Sometimes it comes in the space between silence and sound, where 2 families learned that the most important things in life need no words at all. Malik and Ava's merger wasn't just of 2 hearts, but of 2 worlds. A world where a millionaire CEO learned that the greatest wealth is understanding, where success is measured not in dollars, but in the smile on your child's face when they find someone who speaks their language. And a world where a single father discovered that love can speak in any language, through any medium, as long as you're brave enough to listen. The greatest miracles don't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. They whisper in the flutter of small hands forming signs in airplane aisles. They arrive in the tears of a mother who finally feels understood. They live in the laughter of children who found friends who speak their language, whatever that language might be. If this story reminded you that kindness is a language everyone can speak, that understanding matters more than words, and that love finds a way even in the most unexpected places, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances exist, that broken families can become whole in new ways, that children see what adults miss when we're too tired or too scared or too comfortable to step outside our assigned seats, because we're all searching for the same things: connection, understanding, love. And sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to unbuckle their seatbelt and walk toward the crying instead of away from it. Remember, the most beautiful connections happen when we're brave enough to step outside our comfort zones, to see beyond the surface, to recognize that every person, hearing or deaf, rich or struggling, first class or economy, is searching for the same fundamental things: understanding, connection, love. This is a story about how a single act of compassion became the first chapter in a love story that would last a lifetime, how two broken families found wholeness in each other, how children taught adults to see the world with fresh eyes and open hearts. And most of all, it's a reminder that sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, even when you're exhausted in seat 19 of a crowded flight, even when you're desperate in first class with a crying child you can't quite reach, because the next chapter of your life might be waiting just a few rows away.